Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 4 of the Socratic Satsang. We have a panel of 8 speakers today: Kevin Yamamoto, Dyke, Kirstyn Everson Nair, Gagan Jouhal, Tulip Joshi, Simon Stewart Maxwell, George Dallas, and me, Vinod Nair. Welcome, everybody. As usual, each speaker will get 3 to 4 uninterrupted minutes to speak their mind and may speak multiple times. Our topic for today's discussion is anger. Anger is a basic human emotion, a response to a perceived threat, injustice, or frustration. It is a form of arousal that activates the body's fight response. Heart rate increases, adrenaline surges, attention narrows. Psychologically, it signals that a boundary has been crossed. If expressed constructively, it can drive action and change. If uncontrolled, it can be destructive. This is a topic that's dear to me, especially given my autism, and I'm all set for a good discussion here. Over to our first speaker, Kevin Yamamoto.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Vin. This is a topic that is close to both Vin and my heart. We are something that we've tried to get introduced into a group, certainly the Suit group, for the longest time. But finally, with this group, we're proceeding with it, and it's a subject of personal interest to me. My family, unfortunately, has this. The Yamamoto temper is something that is not something that I'm very proud of, especially in my younger days. And as I've gotten older, a little bit more mature, I think I've become a little bit more disciplined in controlling my anger. However, as my wife would attest, that once in a while she can look in my eyes and she'll see a flash in there and saying, "Uh-oh, it's Kevin, take a step back." So it is usually anger is associated with something negative, a negative emotion. But I also want to explore tonight, if I'm allowed to say what are the positive uses of anger. And I know from studying history, there's many instances where um, a phrase to enact an emotion is used to rally a population. I remember watching the Remember the Alamo is a catchphrase for the independence of Texas. During the Spanish-American War, the destruction of the USS Maine, it was Remember the Maine. And more recently, Remember 9/11. And in Canada, I know generally a peaceful nation, but I recall during times of war, especially in the First World War, there was a picture taken where a Canadian soldier looked like he had been crucified. It was from a result of a shell explosion where he was splayed out onto a barn wall, and it looked like he had been crucified by the enemy. And that was also a rallying cry. So whether you consider wars something worth fighting about, or it is using anger to get your population motivated, is one of the reasons or one of the uses of anger. So tonight, just want to open up the floor and discuss. Maybe if you can't come up with a positive, certainly you can always come up with a negative connotation for anger. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can go next. Anger is a topic I've explored and studied carefully. I've even been for therapy on anger. As an autistic person, I have often not been able to understand what emotions I portray when I'm speaking. And there have been times, time and again, when I felt frustrated and people told me I was being angry. I didn't know the difference. I didn't know how it manifested, but I got to know slowly. I find anger is an emotion. Whether it's secondary or primary is another topic. But either way, it's an emotion that has evolved with us over centuries, over thousands of years. So it has functions. It helps you level up. It motivates you. It helps you take action. A lot of good things. The bad things are, of course, it destroys everything. It can burn you to the ground. They say getting angry is like drinking poison to yourself and expecting someone else to die for it. That's the negative side. And then is the cultural side, which fascinates me. Um, Maybe, Karen, we can get some of your views on this. In my reading and learning about anger, we came across this information wherein they said in the West, we accept that anger is not always good, but we also celebrate it subtle. We celebrate it in movies, in stories. We have this hero or this main character who gets bullied, pushed around. Life gives him a thrashing, and then he gets angry. And when he gets angry, all bets are off. And then he comes back. We even see this in movie fight scenes where the guy is getting thrashed, and then suddenly he gets angry, and then he beats everyone up. So there is, and we have terms like, I just lost it. It's almost like an excuse for everything that you do when you lose your temper. So there is some acceptance and celebration of anger this side. I also learned that in Japan, this is not something I know, I just learned it, uh, came across this information somewhere that in Japan, you're taught that expressing your anger means you are weak and you have failed. You've run out of options. That's why you're angry. So the person who gets angry first is the person who's weaker. And so they don't celebrate anger there. And people express their anger very differently from other places in the world. So this just fascinates me. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I have a few points surprising because I didn't realize that I have a few things to say. One is that anger could be unresolved issues that creates anger. Two, expressions that one is unable to because of suppression or conditioning or fear. Three, from the yogic point of view, when you have excess fire element, it manifests as anger. And again, we exists within the elements. It's like the cyclical form from ether, air, fire, water, earth. And as we breathe, like this is the cycle. And the same topic or that issue or whatever it is will invoke different reactions depending on which element is dominant. So if the fire element is dominant, then you get angry. And then the same thing will not affect you as much once you let it pass. So taking tranquilizers will have a different effect on the same topic of the discussion. A few years ago, when I used to do excess sun salutations, it would harm me, and I used to get anger issues, which is not now, but of course I recognize it. And then another point is what you just said about culturally how people react. I've seen in situations in the past when I was younger, when people would see an angry side of somebody, they would show more respect. But if you show your calm, they would just like take you for granted. So that's kind of strange. Yeah, these are my points.
Thank you, Gagan.
Yeah, those are great points. I just also touching on some of what Kevin was saying, just maybe finding some of the good of anger. That's always kind of difficult, I would say. As I was kind of looking up this subject earlier, I came across a quote that Aristotle says about anger. So anyone can become angry. That is easy. But to be angry with the right person to the right degree at the right time, that is not easy. I think anger is a natural emotion. We live in a world where there's conflict that is happening right now. You'd think after thousands of years of human civilization, we may have figured out conflict resolution, but that doesn't go to this scale, but we still have it. So that it maybe I would say drives just the natural human behavior of folks. This is how folks react. But now how do you view that anger? Like if we look at to talk about current day situation, we have the conflict between Israel and Palestine, and it's who's viewing that as angry, and who's viewing that as hey, these are people trying to fight for their rights. So you know what I mean. So it's that quote, to be angry at the right time, the right place, and in the world that we live in, with the folks who have the right influence viewing that anger and how that is perceived.
Thank you. Yes, George.
Yeah, well, Kirstyn, Vin, Simon, and I had a good initial conversation about all of this stuff last night. I think one of the things that Kirstyn said that resonated with me is that anger is just an emotion at the end of the day, just like any other emotion. And so I feel like there's a couple of parts to sort of build off that. First is being able to like identify that emotion properly. I feel like a lot of people, myself included, can have a hard time actually identifying when we're angry and when it's another emotion going on. Anger is often, or is rarely an emotion by itself. It's often an emotion mixed up with other things like sadness. Gagan talking about Israel-Palestine, there's sort of anger and sadness is a lot of the reaction to a lot of these things as well. So passing those two out, I feel a lot of people have a hard time identifying how much of their emotional response to something is anger and how much is something else. And like I said, myself included, I'm not saying that from a higher place. I am definitely working through that too. I do think there's also different types of anger. There's anger that is let me put this another way. Once you have the emotion of anger, there's kind of how is it then directed after that? And that's kind of a choice that you have as a person. Like, you don't really have a choice over the emotion overcoming you, but you do have a choice as to how to utilize that anger or to not utilize that anger. I feel like you can turn anger inwards, and that can be a destructive force. You can also use anger to become a better person, and build off that. Or you can direct anger outwards in a destructive way as well. So for instance, let's say someone hurts your pride, which is a pretty common way to induce anger in someone. If you say to someone, you're looking very fat at the moment, that can create an angry response. You can then take that anger, direct it inwards and be like, well, I'm a terrible person. Of course I'm fat. No one likes me. I was in poor me, blah, blah, blah. That's a destructive way to process that anger. A constructive way to process that anger is to say, well, yeah, maybe I am fat. After the emotion of anger comes through you, you say, well, maybe I am fat. Maybe I should get on the treadmill and eat better and, grow as a person like that. Or you can take it out on someone else and brood on the anger for a while and then end up, shouting at your wife for not doing the dishes that evening. And that's kind of something that can happen there. So I feel like anger in itself, again, Kirstyn said this point last night, so I'm kind of stealing her point. Apologies, Kirstyn. But anger in itself is just an emotion, and an emotion in itself is kind of, I wouldn't say boring, but it's just a thing that happens. I think where it becomes interesting is how do you process that anger? And lastly, just to sort of go on to Kevin's point, is that this can also be done on a population-wide level. So, you know, breeding anger towards other nations as a nation state, you know, say, oh, look at China stealing all of our jobs. Like, don't you hate the Chinese? And, you know, you're sort of brooding that anger within a population-wide level. So this can happen on an individual level. It can happen on a population-wide level. Yeah, those are my initial thoughts.
Thank you, George. Lots for us to think about. Thank you. We got a rejoinder from Gagan and then over to Simon.
Those some great points there, George. You also kind of laid out some examples of how to maybe how to make some resolution with that anger. If you are feeling anger, what are some ways you can take it out? You can take it inwardly, you can take it outwardly, which could be destructive, or you can maybe work, you know, use that anger to change, perhaps. Would it? I mean, there's a million ways to look at it, and I struggle with anger too, and some of the ways where I try to manage it is maybe like the Eastern philosophy, the Zen way of trying to do things, and I'm not perfect at that. I mean, I try to look at anger as a non-duality, try to look at the world in a non-duality way, and look at anger as just on the same, two, good and evil, same side, two sides of the same coin. But looking at it from that lens, what if you do nothing with that anger? If you, what's the best way to kind of handle those? Or, those are kind of the options that, or philosophy or solution that folks give out, but maybe just opening up for everyone as well.
Thank you. Over to Simon.
Thanks, Vin. Yeah, so I think like other folks, definitely a bit of a personal topic for me this week. If I'm vulnerable and reflect, definitely have quite a deep relationship, I think, with anger. Maybe a little bit like different from kind of like yours. You were describing a bit, Vin, earlier. I really resonate with what Gagan said about that Aristotle quote. I was also digging around and really likes that one too. I think that idea of kind of like how do you do anger right is definitely an interesting one. I'm a pretty easygoing kind of guy, I would say most of the time. I'm like pretty jolly and like enjoy being kind of like good natured kind of thing. But actually, in dealing with somewhat significant childhood trauma, I like dealt with like different therapists, and definitely one of my therapists talked about anger being information, which I found really useful in the sense of having quite a depressed response to stuff that I should have been angry about, and that like by not feeling that emotion, that was actually having quite a like a kind of opposite kind of depressed kind of effect on me. And so now in my relationship with anger, like I had to go through a whole phase of just kind of letting myself be angry every day on my dog walks, and just kind of like really kind of like feeling it, and then just kind of letting myself like calm down. And like now when I notice something come up, I really try and kind of like use that by like leaning into it. I write stuff down as to like why I'm angry, and just let the fury come out, as it were, but just sort of like on paper, and then let it point me towards what boundary I think has been crossed of mine, and that maybe what kind of conversation I need to have with someone like next. So that's been a like a very useful way of relating to my anger. I think like in terms of kind of how we kind of talk about anger, I think there's like a clue maybe in kind of the different ways that we can relate to it in terms of the temperature of like anger. There's like this idea of like white hot anger, where there's really, I think, no separation between the angry emotion and then our response immediately to it. And I would say that that's generally pretty destructive, like, because you're just fairly out of control, right? Like if someone's white hot angry kind of thing, but then there's kind of cold fury. And I definitely think like there's some cool examples where I think people have like used that in like really, really like a cold kind of fury in really good ways. Like Christopher Hitchens was like very famously against Henry Kissinger. And I think like sometimes as much as we can want kind of positive conflict resolutions, we do just have enemies sometimes. Like we do just have people that are against what we want and are potentially are a threat to us. And while I don't think that we should embrace people as enemies with any kind of relish, I do think sometimes reality is that like my existence might just be at odds with like someone else's existence, and that like potentially a cold calculated fury is not necessarily a dreadful thing to like engage with. So yeah, just some thoughts there.
Thank you. Gagan, you had a response, and then George will give.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I that was great, Simon, how you mentioned some tools to handle your anger, journal or reflect. I just want to point out I try to do that too, catch myself when I find myself in that state. And I sometimes I feel so juvenile for some of the things that trigger me. I just throwing that out there. It's just like my pride gets hurt for the stupidest reason. I reflect on it or journal about it. I just feel so juvenile. I can't believe I was mad about it. And I just hope I hope I can handle it better as time goes by.
Thank you, George.
Yeah, all great points. Yeah, a point again to shoehorn Nietzsche in all the time. So I think what Gagan was saying about sort of being stoic about anger, I think that's great. And I personally don't think there's anything wrong with having a stoic approach to anger and those kind of emotions. Like some negative emotions, for want of a better word. I feel what Nietzsche said about Stoicism and kind of where I would maybe, put a bit of nuance on it or a bit of difference going on. But like, this isn't to say that Stoicism is bad, but he would say that Stoicism is kind of it's the aim of Stoicism is to kind of overcome these emotions and ultimately, to be like a river and let things flow over you, and in a way that's almost a unnatural way of being. So like Stoicism is good because you're acknowledging that the emotions are there and that, you're having them. However, it's kind of not natural in that you're not necessarily acting on them. Like an end goal of a stoic approach to anger or something like that is to, again, be a river and sort of let it flow over you. I think where Nietzsche would differ with that, and I think maybe where I'm slightly more with it, is that it's good to sort of acknowledge whatever is angering you and act on it in a kind of positive way, and to again try and focus on getting the positive out of it while acknowledging it and working through it in that way. Again, it's a sort of it's a bit of a nuanced point, but yeah, I'd say like that's where sort of the difference between virtue with Stoicism versus Nietzsche lies.
Thank you. So a couple of thoughts on dealing with anger and how to manage it. One topic which I think is huge is just be able to be aware when you are angry. Because there is a point where you're calm, then you get triggered, then you get angry. So quite often, at least in my case, I don't know when I've been triggered, and I don't even know that I'm angry till I'm well into it. So one part of dealing with anger for me is just getting to know that I'm angry or that I have been triggered. That's one. The second topic is anger management per se. There's three sides to it that I look at. One is what you can do before getting angry, what you can do once you are triggered, and what you can do after the episode. So prior precautions that I like to keep in mind would be things like make sure you're well rested, make sure that your logistics are taken care of. If you're driving somewhere, leave well enough in time. Sometimes you get stressed out if you are late, and that can cause triggers. Not being well fed, not having slept well, being irritable. These are all things that can trigger people. So I'd look out for these. When you are getting triggered, here's a few things that have been extremely, extremely useful for me. One is keeping an eye out for catastrophizing. When you hear some bad news, it tends to snowball or become big in your head, and then you react in a big way. Generalizing, and the most important one, which for me has been almost a turning point, is telling myself that there's no such thing as sure. Half the triggers that I get are because things don't go as they should, or people don't react as they should, or a situation doesn't pan out as it should. So being able to manage the shoulds in your head is a big part, at least for me, for anger management. And then post the episode, once you've gotten angry, you've got to, revisit the whole episode, appraise yourself, look at how it could have been handled better, what could I have done to have stopped it, and what is the consequence or the penalty that I'm getting myself to make sure I don't do it again, are generally the things that I look at. Just my thoughts. Yes, sir.
Oh, just on the should thing, I'm like definitely reminded of just like a concept called the victim oppressor rescuer triangle. And like it's quite like a useful idea of just kind of like recognizing kind of like unhealthy roles that you might be like falling into. And so the like should is often like when we're kind of like trying to relate to this like rescuer or like authority, that like, you're kind of like wanting that like there's someone there that should be kind of like intervening kind of thing, and recognizing that this is like wrong kind of thing. And that can often be coming from like a kind of, hey, like I'm viewing myself like as a victim here, and kind of that I'm often externalizing that someone else is being an oppressor kind of thing, and that often, as you say, things are just a lot more complicated than that reality that's got going on in your head.
Thank you. No. Who's next? Yes, sir.
I would say the should kind of reminds me of maybe the current day news cycle. I know we're in the midst of a very heavy election here in north of the border, and it has a lot of emotion around this too. Just the meaningful of it, and just also just how everything that's coming in through the media and social media and everything. Everyone's talking about this. This whole kind of chamber that we're in and getting this kind of news, or at least sometimes I find myself in, it amplifies anger based on hey, you should be maybe reacting like this. And it's now more than ever we can't really trust what is given to us in the news. It starts to make us realize if we ever had should there ever been such trust into these institutions, but these institutions help kind of amplify righteous anger, using that should or manipulating presenting things in the way how you should feel.
Thank you. You would like to go next? Yes, sir.
Hi, sorry for starting about 20 minutes late here. I had about a 3-hour car drive home, so a little bit unexpected. So if I go over anything you've already talked about, please excuse me. Picking up on what Gagan was saying there, with everything we have now going on, we're so connected to everyone all around the world all the time that all of our negative things are getting amplified and making us more and more angry. And when you look way back to prehistory time, when man was first coming into the scene, anger probably served them much better than it does now for us, because back then there was a reason you were in danger. There was something that anger was alerting you to, and you had to deal with it. Now we take issues that are so much smaller on a personal level. There's big global effects of things, but on a personal level, they're so much smaller, but we hear it from everywhere. We get it from the news media, we get it from the internet, from various different sources there. Everybody's talking about it at our works, and it just builds that anger. And if we don't deal with it, if we don't find a way to release that, that's when we cause ourselves problems. If we can find a way to tune out some of it, to focus on what's really important to us and not what somebody else is saying, then we can control what we're going to really let upset us. We want to care about the things that are important to us and just try and think rationally about them. When we let ourselves get angry, and nobody's making us angry, we're letting ourselves get angry by our responses to things, right? People may say really dumb things that are really bad for us, but it's how we're going to respond to it. When we let ourselves get angry, then we do things that are harmful to ourselves in the end, usually. So, for example, I could have got angry sitting in the car for 3 hours coming home, but it did no good. It wasn't going to help me at all. I could have got out while we were stopped there and yelled at people. And I mean, it doesn't do anything positive for you. Sure, venting is good, but it can only end up hurting everyone. So the thing to do is try and focus on, I think, your own internal issues, and just think about what's important to you and why something's upsetting you. And a lot of times it's not because it's really that upsetting or inconvenient or harmful to you, but more trivial, inconvenient, and it's just piled up from a whole bunch of things, and this is where it's coming out.
Thank you. George?
Yeah, just to sort of build on what people have been saying, to bring it into the present day, which I think is kind of what Gagan and Drake were sort of doing with talking about like the election and stuff like that, and news media, is that, yeah, it's worth noting that, the internet pretty much is built on advertising, especially from social media networks, and that's how they make money. And so what social media networks try and make you do is click on ads and buy things, and that's how they create profit. I don't think it's any surprise to any of us that social media algorithms are geared towards making people angry and frustrated. Papers are written on this. This is not really this an open secret that's kind of where the algorithm is most effective, is by making you angry and causing a negative reaction out of you. And it's interesting to note that that's the thing that causes you to act. It causes you to click on an advert and buy something. You read a news article that says that World War III is coming, and you get angry and sad and nervous, and then you click on the Amazon advert to buy 10 kilograms of dried beans, because in the apocalypse you're going to need to live on beans for the rest of your life. Like, positive emotions like, you know, happiness, joy, pride, those kind of things don't lead to people clicking on ads. So it's just kind of interesting to note that anger, along with other negative emotions, is the thing that social media companies have figured out is what makes you act, you know? Kind of goes back to what Drake is saying in terms of that kind of natural impulse, you know? You get angry and you have these negative emotions because you need to do something and fix something. And again, it kind of goes back to what we were saying about earlier, right? That like, how do you use anger? You should act off it. You know, there's different ways to act off anger. Some are constructive, some are destructive. But I think the most destructive thing is to turn it inwards. Yeah.
Quick rejoinder for me before we go to Simon is I wonder why we act on anger more than on pleasure or joy. So thought, and why do social media companies by making people angry causes better action? I'll just hand over to Simon and then to you, Greg. Simon, over to you.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, I guess like all super good points. And I think like it's a really like complicated emotion. So I think like essentializing any one way with it, it's like kind of often misses the point. I think to add a bit nuance there, I think like maybe we could make a mistake if we kind of see the kind of this like useless like anger, this kind of like inept anger kind of towards stuff that like we've been kind of fed on like social media algorithms, and then like let that affect our relationship with anger on the whole, like in general. I think to me it's a bit more useful to go like to rather than to kind of change my relationship with anger, to kind of say, is this something I want to get angry about kind of thing? And maybe that's where some stoicism comes in of like, do I have control over kind of any outcomes here kind of thing? Like if I have control, then maybe it's something more worthy of being angry about. Or is this just something that like really doesn't affect me, and it's just something that just like appeals to like my kind of base instincts. And I think the reason why it's important to not just kind of like change your whole relationship with anger is because I think there's like a mistake to be made. I think it'd be misleading to think that generally anger isn't helpful or useful in the sense of like, I know the person I'm dating is like a speech language pathologist. They're they help people kind of like speak and swallow, and they find that the people that are really positive in their relationship with their therapy and the people that are angry in their therapy, like might be like internalized even anger, are often much easier to help than the folks that are apathetic, the folks that barely have any kind of response. Because like at least if you're having a response, you kind of work with that, and you kind of like, so I actually think quite often the danger is like a little bit what I've done previously in my life, which is to have a very kind of sedated response. Like I know when I was like doing some group therapy, I kind of felt quite like I guess like smug and a little bit kind of thinking that like, oh, at least I'm kind of not behaving like some of these folks that I was kind of in group therapy with, that I could see had like much more of an immediate kind of short trigger and were kind of like getting very like animated towards stuff. But the person leading the therapy said that like actually again the same theme, that like that those people are often easier to help, and that like the folks that are just so out of like touch with their emotions to begin with, that aren't feeling their emotions, can be much harder, and that like they should like really take that as a wake-up call to start like feeling your emotions, like start feeling what's going on inside of you. So I do think like, well, we need to be careful about it. I do think one of the ways that we need to be careful about it is not being so afraid of its consequences that we don't allow ourselves to like feel the emotion to begin with. And I think that's like really essential.
Thank you, Simon. Great.
Yeah, this was just a rejoinder to yourself, Vin, to your rejoinder. You were saying what causes us to act stronger, more on anger than it does on the positive emotions and that. And I think, again, that goes back to the fact that we're acting on a threat. Anger, we're perceiving a threat, whether it's real or not. And it's a life preservation thing from, I think, way back in our past history, where if we didn't act, if we didn't get angry and respond to something, bad things were going to happen to us. So those things that were vital to us then are the kind of things that still stick with us to this day. So that negative emotion of anger is going to be much quicker and much more present still than a positive emotion like happiness or something, right? That's why I think we react quicker to it.
Thank you. Yes, Judith.
So this is again with what you said about why we react with the way we do for anger versus the positive side. This holds true for any other news. Like what I've realized is if there's some sensational news which is not necessarily true or something not nice, people would spread that quicker than someone saying the truth or someone finding or discovering something or positive emotion. So this is again, yeah, that's what I've noticed about the negative versus the happier news.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, George.
Yeah, and I think that like is kind of thinking about anger on that population level, which I think taps into news, is an interesting avenue to go down as well. Because I think it's a different type of anger. It can hit familiar tones. I mean, I think a lot of anger comes out of pride being hurt, and there's like personal pride, and then there's your sort of the pride in the identity that you have, and that identity can be shared on a population level. And I think a lot of news media and stuff is designed to kind of hit your anger on those sort of identity parts of you. That isn't necessarily to say that that's a bad thing. There's a really good philosopher called Frantz Fanon, who is a anti-colonial philosopher, and he is very pro-anger. I found a good quote from him that said, "At the level of individuals, violence is a cleansing force. It frees the native from his inferiority complex and from his despair and inaction. It makes him fearless and restores his self-respect." I feel like, if you're the population that's being colonized, or historically is being colonized, there is a righteous anger to have there, whether on a historical level or on a sort of current day level. Again, it goes back to how do you actually act on that anger? And I think there's righteous, just ways to act on that anger, and there's unjust ways to act on that anger. For instance, if you're a Black person in the United States and you feel a sort of historical anger over slavery, it's probably not right to go out and just beat up the nearest white person you see. That's not a good way to take out your anger over your historical kind of sense of anger over slavery. However, something like the Haitian Revolution, where the Haitians were extremely violent towards the French, but the French were historically, brutalizing the native Haitians. There's a good argument to say that was righteous violence and a sort of positive way to process that anger. And the Haitians got their independence, one of the few colonies that actually completely ousted the colonialists. So yeah, I think like thinking about anger on a population level and how it hits the parts of your identity that you associate with is an interesting kind of avenue to go down.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Yeah, constructive angle. Thank you. Who's next?
Yes, sir.
So, great points here. One thing that I think we keep coming back to is the degree of anger that needs to be applied. It's a very delicate decision to make, the degree of anger you want to delegate. How you want to act on this anger. And the world we live in, it's not a perfect world. There's war going on right now. So some of these actions, it is violence. So, and it happens all over the world. And some of the points that we've touched where the indigenous folks or the folks that are being colonized retaliate back, and it happens all over the world. It happens in, the Troubles in Northern Ireland. It's a very mild sounding word, the Troubles, but it's caused death and chaos in let's say established Western side of the world, and it goes all the way down to the southern tip of Africa, where at one point Nelson Mandela was even considered a terrorist for insinuating some of the action and reaction in that area. So you have to be such a morally, your morals have to be, you have to be Jesus to make these decisions, really, like you have to be a perfect human being to kind of say, hey, I'm drawing that line in the sand, and I'm gonna make this decision. I don't know how those decisions have been made, and just finding yourself in that situation where that's the way you're gonna react is you have to go. I don't know. I've been lucky enough where I haven't been in that situation, so I couldn't imagine. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Tulip?
I think, we've been discussing about the world and philosophers and about wars, but what I think it all starts from your home, because parents, siblings, and families, that's where while growing up, that's where we get scarred. And there is snowballs then you go outward, then the wars and all happen. So it starts from the home, and probably and I'm sure no one does it intentionally, but it's where that starts from. That's the I think that's the root cause of the mess that we are in right now.
Thank you. Simon?
Yeah, just going down this societal level. I know that it'd be George will be happy I bring up Nietzsche, and there's the fun flip side to now play the kind of the devil's advocate, I suppose, on the negative side of anger at the societal level, which is this idea of resentment and envy and jealousy, which maybe is not exactly the same emotion as anger, but I think often can be a similar kind of related emotion, where maybe it's some anger that you're noticing someone has something that you want, kind of thing, and that that this, I think, is something we have to be quite careful of. And I guess from my kind of place, kind of coming from the world of the UK, this isn't something where I maybe noticed other cultures have got a very kind of deliberate relationship with resentment kind of thing and envy. The whole kind of the evil eye, the kind of envious eye kind of thing, and then this idea of saying inshallah in kind of Arabic cultures, which I didn't realize apparently part of the idea of that is that when someone has something good happen, you're saying inshallah, which kind of translates to oh, if God wills it, kind of thing, to kind of deliberately kind of voice that you're not resentful because clearly this is this kind of good fortune or whatever has kind of been kind of bestowed upon you. And I think that's quite interesting, because I think if resentment gets out of control, some quite kind of bad things happen in society. And I know Nietzsche had a lot to say about resentment and its kind of relationship with socialism and fun stuff like that. So
Thank you. So a couple of talks here. Religions and spiritual gurus, leaders have for years told us about how bad anger is, and we're always talking about curbing it and controlling it. But if you read authors like Richard Dawkins, you'll find that anger has survived thousands, maybe more than thousands of years of evolution. And it's not limited to human beings. Anger is even there with animals. You can see a dog getting angry often. So it's survived, and it's such an essential emotion because it has certain functions, mainly 4 functions or 5: protection, motivation, communication, self-validation, and energy mobilization are the main functions or benefits of anger. And the thought I had, which I'd just like to share here, is what if you removed anger from our equation entirely? What if we just did not get angry? Would civilization still have progressed the way it would? Would we still be the dominating predator? How would we be without anger, completely devoid of anger? It's just a thought that's stirring in my head. Yes, yes.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think it's kind of it's almost too hypothetical for me though, because it's so human, right? That it's like it's sort of saying like, what if we weren't human beings? Which is is an interesting line of thought to go down, but I think is kind of is never something that can be washed out of like the human experience at all. I don't think. By the way, one thing I was thinking of is like that a positive way to process anger, I feel, is to forget stuff. People don't usually think about forgetting as like a positive force, but like I feel like that's a way to let go of anger and to let go of a resentment, is to just forget about it, like the people next door to me have a much better car or going on a much better holiday. But if you just literally forget that they went on a nice holiday, that in itself is like a powerful, positive way to process something. And there's an argument to be made that the things that you remember are the things that you haven't let go of yet, and that forgetting is like a positive way to approach life and that kind of stuff. And then, yeah, the other point I was just thinking of is that like it's like breeding resentment on a societal level can turn into a sort of positive revolutionary force, and that doesn't always mean that like the ends need to be achieved and that the ends are in sight in a way. Like revolutions, like something that I've been thinking about recently is that like revolutions are kind of quite separate from the ends of what the revolution is aiming for, and that like a certain people or population like become revolutionary, and that's almost like because they've been like a kettle that hasn't been allowed the steam to escape, and it's the pressure's just building and building, and then it just needs to explode. And that in itself can be a positive thing because it leads to change. And sometimes just a population needs to process anger by bringing change about, and there may be an end in sight, but that end is very rarely achieved. Like there's not many revolutions that ended in the way that they originally sought out to end. French Revolution didn't do that. Russian Revolution didn't do that. There's a good argument to say the American Revolution didn't do that. So yeah, that's just also something to think about with relation to anger, is that breeding resentment in society can turn into a positive force, but that positive force doesn't need to be super deliberate in terms of, I don't judge the Russian people for not achieving communist utopia, because they had to have a revolution in 1917. Like, they just had to have a revolution in 1917. They weren't getting bread, you know? Like, those two things are kind of mutually exclusive. And that anger built up and, you know, ended in change. And, you know, the peasants needed change in some kind of way. So, yeah.
Thank you, Josh. Would like to go next? Can you elucidate a little more when you say the French, Russian, and American revolutions did not meet their goals? Like, when you say they started out for something, it did something else, what do you mean?
Yeah. So, I mean, the French Revolution tried to get rid of the French aristocracy and kings, and yet ended in Napoleon and another king by another name. The Russian Revolution aimed for a communist utopia and ended in an authoritarian hellscape that called itself communism. The American Revolution is a kind of interesting one in that actually a lot of the early American revolutionary writing was actually talking about like transforming people into a new man and like having society just act in a completely different way, like not democracy, just, you know, we are completely new human beings. And it didn't do that. It kind of just mimicked a democracy that, you know, was going on in Europe at the time. So yeah, pretty much no revolutions actually hit their goals. But that's not to say that a society doesn't need to become revolutionary at some point. And that is kind of is bred through anger on a population level, you know, usually suppressed anger, yeah, which is resentment.
Thank you. You know, I've seen some mob violence in India. And what I've found is that, and this is something I'd love to know your thoughts on, I mean, everyone here, is whenever I've seen mob violence, it's not that everyone's angry at that person who's being lynched or that group of people who are being attacked. It's more of just an excuse to do violence. People, the mob are just jumping on. They don't even know why they're joining the fun or why they're burning someone alive. They're just doing it. It's something that I've never been able to understand. I'm still going to understand. I'd love to know your views on. Yes, Tulip and Simon.
I think it's when you have it in you, it's just an excuse. Like you said, you don't know why, but you're just enjoying it because you have so much hate in you in general. See, you get angry for certain things, but generally, a lot of people have jealousy and anger, and they're just angry with the world. And so they're like, hey, okay, let's join this, and where some people get paid as well. A lot of politicians pay them just to do that because they see, they see how angry they are. And it's got nothing to do with, they're not even aware of what's going on. They just need to remove it somewhere.
Thank you to the Simon. Over to you.
Yeah, I think it's like a little bit the same like psychology as like the film The Purge, you know, where like once a year you can just like all bets are off kind of thing. And I think like we are normally living in such a controlled environment where, you know, we have so many kind of so many things that we've got to take into account in terms of consideration for like our others kind of thing. You know, we've got to kind of like be careful of other people's feelings, and that there's like a lot of that kind of repressed anger, I think, where, you know, we would really like to punch the guy in the face, but like that's probably going to mean that we're going to lose our job. And like, you know, tons of like little situations like that where we just got to kind of like internalize and control something, and like that's like kind of work and doesn't feel great. And so I think it's like very cathartic to just like especially if you've got the safety of knowing that like socially you're not going to pay any consequences, because that's like a little bit kind of what's happening in a mob is, you know, everyone's just like going ham kind of thing. So I think it's just like a little bit of that like cathartic, like I don't have to kind of play by the usual rules that kind of mean that I'm normally having to kind of exert work to kind of round off my edges kind of thing. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, I guess it's also like seizing power in the moment, whatever kind of power. Thank you. Who's next?
Okay, a couple of thoughts I had was that I think we all seem to agree that anger is part of us. We all seem to have grappled with it at some time. We understand that it has good benefits if it's channelized, and if it's out of control, it can just rip through us completely. It's a phenomenal. It's like having a weapon which just can blow anyone apart, and it's important to learn to cope with it, how to figure it, how to be aware of it. Fascinating topic. Kevin, since you brought this up, any thoughts from you on our discussion? Something to wrap up?
Well, for all my colleagues here who have an issue with anger management, I just want to say welcome to the human race. It is an extremely human emotion, and I'm glad I'm not the only one who can see benefits to anger as well as the detriments to it. It is a topic I thought we would have trouble discussing because it's usually a negative emotion. It's so nice to hear the counterpoint of that argument. So thank you very much for entertaining this point of discussion tonight. I do value all your opinions, and tonight I found myself entertained but also educated. So thank you very much, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll end this topic here before we move on to our next item of business, and we will see you. I think next our session is going to be on May 8th. So thank you, everybody.